Welcome back. The rates of intimate partner violence in Canada have climbed so high that many are now calling it an epidemic.
November is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and here to talk about this urgent issue is Katreena Scott, Canada Research Chair in Ending Child Abuse and Domestic Violence. Katreena, welcome to the show. Thank you.
So good to have you here. Important conversation. So first and foremost, you say that we need to stop talking about intimate partner violence as a side issue. What do you mean by that exactly?
Yeah, for sure. So let's just start by making it a bit personal. So we know that intimate partner violence is very, very common. And if we look around this room here, we know that most of us have either been in a relationship that was unsafe or know a friend or family member, neighbor, or work colleague who was in an unsafe relationship. And we know that for women who are facing other forms of discrimination and inequity, Indigenous women, Black women, women who are living in poverty, the risk is even higher. But you know, we don't often think about what that means for our systems. So let's start with police. Okay. So only a little bit of intimate partner violence is reported to police, but 30% of the violent crime that police respond to is intimate partner violence. 2/3 of women who are killed in Canada are killed by an intimate partner. So it's a core issue for police. Or child protection. About half of the children who are involved with child protective services are there because they're living in a home where one parent, usually their father, is abusing their mother. So it's core for them as well. And so that's why I think it's important that we start thinking about this as an epidemic and thinking about the National Action Plan to put all these pieces together.
So we know that the pandemic and the social isolation associated with that really did not help the situation at all. What else has been a major contributor to the rise?
Yeah, well, you know, sitting today and what you were just talking about, there's been a real emboldening of attitudes that are misogynistic, that are sexist. There's been a reduction in women's rights in certain areas, and all of these things contribute to violence. We know that violence thrives in secrecy and isolation, and we are still not as connected as we should be. And I think that we're living through a time now where a lot of our systems are strained. So housing is expensive. That means it's harder to escape. And social services are strained, which means that it's harder to get the help that you need.
I love this next question because I'm supposed to ask you the risk factors that make someone more likely to perpetrate intimate partner violence. And I like that we're focusing on the perpetrator because I think so often, maybe it's just me, this is framed as a woman's issue.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I want to talk about that a little bit more. First, I want to just talk a little bit about the risk factors because, you know, I sit on the Ontario Coroner's Domestic Violence Death Review Committee. So that's actually a committee where groups of people come together and look at every single domestic violence-related death in Ontario to try to figure out what we have to do differently to prevent that. And we've learned a lot. And one of the things we've learned is that these deaths don't come out of the blue. So in 70% of the cases, there's 7 or more risk factors. Things like a history of domestic violence, a recent separation, somebody saying, you know, I'm worried. I think that he might do something really harmful. An escalation of his violence, him being obsessive or jealous, or, you know, if he's depressed or potentially suicidal, that's a risk factor as well.
Wow. All right. So we hear a lot of stories about women who reach out to authorities for help and they don't get that help. So I'm curious, what protections do victims of IPV currently have in this country?
Yeah, and I like that question because sometimes we think about victims as being sort of passive, but the reality is people are doing everything they can to be safe.
And they're still not getting the help.
That's right. So partly what we need to do is we need to have good, consistent funding for our core domestic violence services. And then I think we have to come back to this issue. It's not a side issue. It is a core issue for so many of our systems, police and child protection, but also health and mental health and substance use. So how do we make sure that everybody, no matter what door somebody opens to say, I'm concerned, how can everybody recognize those risk factors and warning signs and start to have conversations? And that includes us as neighbors, friends, families, and work colleagues.
You've done a lot of work also engaging men and boys in conversations. I'm curious about what that looks like and what kinds of strategies you find are the most effective in reaching them.
Well, and that is absolutely back to your question. How do we talk to men? And, you know, part of it is that we have to start shifting that conversation and stop asking, you know, what has she done? Why hasn't she left? Why is she putting up with that? What about?
Why doesn't she just leave?
Yeah, why doesn't she just, what about, what is he doing? Why is he doing that? Why isn't he stopping? And there are so many places we can have that conversation. So we could have that conversation, well, why don't I just choose mental health or substance use or health services? If somebody is saying, you know what, I'm getting angrier and angrier, or I find myself using more substances, why don't we think, what does that look like at home? And start to ask those kinds of questions and start to really lean into those conversations with men and boys about what is it like and how are you going to change it? Is this really what you want in your relationship?
So again, this question is, if we suspect somebody is the victim of intimate partner violence, again, I'm supposed to ask you, what are we supposed to do to help? But also I want to ask, what if we suspect that he is perpetrating this? What are we supposed to do?
Yeah. So let me start with that part first, because I think that when we're suspecting that somebody is perpetrating violence, so often we don't know what to say. We don't know what the words are, and we don't know how to start the conversation. And I think that sometimes prevents us, or feeling sure that violence is happening may prevent us from saying something. And I think one thing to know is that you don't have to be sure, and you don't have to know that it's true. But there is value in seeing and saying what you see, expressing concern, and opening the door for a conversation. And there are some resources out there to do that. So Ontario has a program called the Neighbours, Friends and Family Program that's been around for a long time. It's a website that you can go to. It's a public education campaign. There's tip sheets for talking to her and to him. There are little videos that you can look at. And it really is about, how do you open the door to a conversation to her or to him that will create a connection and allow you to start having this conversation, and in some cases may be so important to creating a path to safety or saving someone's life.
Yeah, and my question kind of echoes what you just said, but because what the great thing about this show is we can have these important conversations. So I'm just wondering, if there is a person who's at home watching right now and they're experiencing intimate partner violence and they just want to know the first step they need to take, what advice would you give them?
Yeah. So obviously, if you're in imminent risk, you should call the police. But there are other things as well. So Ontario has a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week assaulted women's helpline that people can call. There is Shelter Safe, where you can contact your local shelter. And I think sometimes people think that shelters are only about fleeing violence and being into a different place, but you can call a shelter and get information. The other thing is, there's a really great Canadian-made app called iHeal. And so maybe you're not ready to talk to anybody, but you can look at that app and get some ideas and some suggestions for your own safety.
Great.
Well, I understand that you brought us some purple scarves today, so we'd love to know, what is the significance of the purple scarf?
Yes, so I am wearing one of those purple scarves. It's the 11th year of Wrapped in Courage. This is an event run by the Ontario Association of Interval and Transition Houses, and we wear a purple scarf to recognize survivors of gender-based violence.
So important. Katreena, thank you so much for being here today and sharing all this information. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Hey, you, come a bit closer. We've got so many more must-see interviews, spicy debates, lifestyle tips, and pop culture moments. So subscribe to our channel by tapping the logo below and don't miss out.